Anthony Tony Carter had been working at the Astoria Grand for 9 years, and the building still found ways to remind him it wasn't his. Not in any cruel, obvious fashion. No one shouted at him to get out. No one slapped the mop out of his hands. It was subtler than that, a quiet current that kept him in the shadows while the chandeliers blazed above. That evening, New York was wearing its summer perfume. Hot pavement, a faint brine from the East River, and the smoky sweetness from hot dog carts lined along Lexington Avenue. Outside the hotel's brass and glass entrance, a yellow cab rolled to a stop every few seconds, discharging gowns, tuxedos, and the occasional tangle of camera equipment. The sidewalk gleamed, hosed down earlier in the day, as if even the concrete had been invited to the gala. Tony had started his shift the same way he always did, stopping by the deli on 72nd Street. The owner, a man named Sal, who remembered everyone's coffee order better than their name, had Tony's ready before he even reached the counter. "Large decaf, 2 sugars, and don't forget to tip the night guy," Sal reminded with a grin. Tony slid a folded bill into the tip jar without looking at the amount, habit, not charity, and stepped back into the humid evening. Inside the Astoria Grand, the air was crisp, almost cold, smelling faintly of lemon polish and expensive perfume. The lobby marble reflected the light in smooth, creamy swirls, each one buffed to perfection by people who would never appear in the photographs taken that night. Just past the concierge desk, someone had taped a laminated sign to the wall, "No staff in photo areas." Tony had seen it 100 times, but the bold font still managed to feel like a hand on his shoulder, steering him away. Martha Lewis, the head housekeeper, spotted him rolling his supply cart toward the ballroom. "You're on glass duty tonight, hun. Keep ahead of the PR crew. They're running people through the east hallway." She adjusted the strap of her orthopedic shoes and handed him a small roll of mints. "For later, these things run long." Before Tony could thank her, a voice from behind cut in. "Service elevator, Carter." Darren, one of the newer security guards, tilted his chin toward the rear hallway. His tone wasn't unkind, but it left no room for negotiation. "Red carpets for guests." Tony nodded, pushing the cart toward the less glamorous route. The service elevator smelled faintly of cardboard and detergent, its walls scarred by years of catering trays and garment racks. The ride was short, but long enough for him to think about the Steinway grand piano in the ballroom upstairs, a thought he quickly brushed aside. When the elevator doors opened, the sound of the gala spilled in. Laughter, champagne flutes chiming, the low hum of a jazz trio playing something bright and forgettable. Tony slipped in along the perimeter, collecting empty glasses from tables where guests were still finding their seats. No one looked at him directly. Their eyes slid past, toward the glittering stage or the promise of the next pour. He caught sight of Charlotte Avery making her entrance. The owner of the Astoria Grand moved through the crowd like a ship under full sail, her sequined gown catching every beam of light. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned in, and Charlotte smiled as if she had all the time in the world. From where Tony stood, it was a different climate entirely. Warmth and applause for her, cool efficiency for him. At the far end of the room, the Steinway sat under its own halo of light. Its lacquered surface reflected the chandelier above, keys lined in a perfect smile. Tony lingered near it longer than necessary, a tray of glasses balanced on one hand. His fingers, curled around the tray's edge, twitched the way they used to before a downbeat. Martha's voice startled him. "Don't even think about it, Tony," she said, but her smile was kind. She pressed a bottle of water into his free hand. "Save your energy. Nights like this have a way of surprising you." Tony didn't know yet how right she was. Tony moved through the tables in a practiced rhythm, pick up a glass, slide it onto the tray, swap for a fresh one if the guest caught his eye. Most didn't. Tonight, eyes were drawn to the stage where a local TV personality was warming up the crowd, making the kind of jokes that land easiest when champagne has been flowing for half an hour. Every so often, the PR team would sweep through like stagehands, rearranging guests for photo ops. A staffer in a headset spotted Tony and gave a polite but firm, "Could you step back just a bit? We're getting a wide shot." She didn't say, "You're in the way," but she didn't have to. He adjusted his route, hugging the wall. The sign from earlier, "No staff in photo areas," might as well have been tattooed in his mind. He wondered if anyone else in the room noticed it, or if it had become as invisible as the people it applied to. From the stage, Charlotte Avery was introduced, and the applause rose like a tide. She walked with that effortless glide people learn from years of being watched, pausing at just the right moments for the photographers to catch her best angles. Tony saw her glance around the room, not at the tables, not at the staff, but at the clusters of donors, each one a possible headline. Martha passed by, her arms full of linen napkins. "Careful around her," she murmured without looking at him. "She's got the smile on tonight." Tony gave a small nod. He'd seen that smile before. It was the one she wore when she was on stage, literally or otherwise. The jazz trio in the corner shifted to a Gershwin medley, light and sweet, the kind of music meant to be wallpaper. Tony recognized "They Can't Take That Away From Me" under the chatter and the clink of silverware. His hands itched again. When the first course was served, Tony retreated to the service corridor to drop off his tray. The hallway smelled faintly of roasted vegetables and the industrial dishwasher's sharp steam. Darren, the security guard, was stationed at the back door, scrolling on his phone. "Busy night," Tony offered. Darren shrugged. "They all look the same after a while. Different gowns, same attitude." He paused, eyeing Tony's empty tray. "You know they got $1 million piano in there?" Tony smirked. "I noticed." "Guess they figured it'll impress people," Darren said. "Not like anyone here's going to actually play it." Tony didn't answer. Back in the ballroom, dessert plates were being cleared to make room for the main program. Speeches, a video about the foundation's work, more speeches. Tony found himself near the rear doors, where he could see the piano from a distance. A young server brushed past him, muttering under his breath about a guest who'd mistaken him for parking staff. Tony almost laughed. It was too familiar to be funny. Then, as Charlotte returned to the stage, something unexpected happened. She glanced toward the back, toward him. Just a flicker of a look, quick enough that he almost doubted it. But in that glance, Tony read the same calculation he'd seen in so many others here. "Do you belong?" Martha intercepted him again before he could get too close to the stage. "Don't let her rope you into anything," she said. Tony raised an eyebrow. "I'm just doing my job." "That's what I mean." She moved on before he could ask what she meant exactly. Near the end of the program, the MC called for one last round of applause for the donors. People stood, clapping politely, already half-turned toward the exits or the bar. In the commotion, Tony took a slow walk along the edge of the room, tray balanced against his hip. The Steinway's black surface caught the light and, for a moment, reflected his own face back at him. He remembered the feel of ivory keys under his fingers, the way a chord could bloom in the air and change the temperature of a room. It had been years since he'd played for anyone but himself, longer still since he'd played without thinking about what it might cost him. "Carter!" The voice snapped him back, Darren again, standing a few feet away. "They're clearing the east side. Might want to loop around." Tony nodded, stepping away from the piano. As the last speech wrapped up, the guests drifted toward the foyer, some stopping for final photos under the chandeliers. Tony stayed near the service entrance, watching the tide of sequins and tuxedos flow past. A few offered half smiles, the kind you give to a stranger holding a door for you. When the room was nearly empty, he crossed back to the piano. No one was watching now. Not guests, not PR, not even Darren. The lid was closed, the bench pushed in, as if waiting for the next scheduled performance. Tony stood there a moment, one hand resting lightly on the polished wood. He could feel the grain beneath the lacquer, could imagine the weight of the keys, the smooth dip of each note under his fingers. From the doorway, Martha called softly, "Shift's not over yet." Tony smiled faintly, pulling his hand back. "I know." But as he turned away, a thought settled in the back of his mind. steady as a metronome. Nights like this have a way of surprising you. Charlotte Avery had been through enough galas to know when a room was hers and when it was getting away from her. Tonight, it was supposed to be the former. A glittering crowd, the perfect dress, a $1 million piano gleaming under the lights. But the phone in her clutch buzzed with the kind of insistence that said, "Ignore me at your peril." She slipped into the side corridor just off the ballroom, the air warmer here, smelling faintly of floor polish. Pressing the phone to her ear, she listened to her head of PR speak in quick bursts. "We've got a blogger digging into the staff turnover numbers again, and the Times is asking for comment about the wage gap report," Charlotte cut in. "Tonight's not the night for that." "It might become the night if it blows up on Twitter during the auction," the PR voice warned. Another buzz. This one a text from a board member. "Talk to the Donovans before they leave. We need their pledge locked in." Charlotte drew in a breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped back into the ballroom with the kind of smile that photographs well from any angle. The auction had just wrapped up, and waiters were circulating with trays of champagne for a final toast. Tony, weaving between tables with an almost invisible presence, reached a hand to steady one of the trays when a guest turned suddenly. The edge of the tray tipped, sending a stream of golden bubbles splashing onto the sleeve of Charlotte's gown. The room didn't go silent, not exactly, but a ripple of attention spread. Heads turned, conversations paused just long enough for the moment to register. Charlotte looked down at the damp sequins, then up at Tony. Her smile held, but it had cooled several degrees. "Do you have any idea what this dress costs?" she said, her voice light enough to pass for banter if you didn't catch the steel underneath. Tony set the empty tray aside. "Apologies, ma'am, I didn't mean—" She waved a dismissive hand. "Of course you didn't. Tell you what." And here she turned to include the nearest cluster of guests, her voice carrying just enough. "If you can play that piano better than the professional we hired, I'll marry you." There was laughter, quick, bright, the kind that people join in without thinking. A man in a white dinner jacket added, "Careful, Charlotte, he might take you up on that." Another guest, eyes flicking to Tony's hands, said, "Well, he's got the right skin tone for the Black Keys at least." The comment drew a few smirks, the kind meant to signal it's just a joke. Tony's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "Not interested in your money or your hand." He looked directly at Charlotte. "But if you give your word, keep it." That took a moment to sink in. The laughter dimmed slightly, replaced by an undercurrent of curiosity. From a table near the stage, Ethan Park watched over the rim of his glass. The music critic had been halfway out the door in his mind. These events were more about schmoozing than artistry. But something in the janitor's tone had pulled him back. Ethan noted the stillness in the man's posture, the lack of fidgeting, not the body language of someone embarrassed into a stunt, more like someone who'd been here before. Charlotte, aware of the eyes on her, tilted her head. "And if you lose?" "I won't," Tony said. A murmur ran through the group, part amusement, part disbelief. Martha had appeared at Tony's elbow, her voice low. "You don't have to." "I know," he said without looking at her. Charlotte gestured toward the Steinway, still bathed in its soft halo of light. "Then prove it." The PR staff sensed an opportunity for a light-hearted viral moment and began ushering guests closer to the stage. Phones came out, camera flashes popped. A few people whispered odds like it was a backroom card game. Ethan moved toward the piano, curiosity sharpened now. He caught Tony's eye and, with a subtle nod, stepped aside to let him pass, ignoring the confused look from a security guard. Tony walked toward the instrument without hurry, as if the noise around him were no more than wind through an open window. Behind him, Charlotte returned to her table, lifting a fresh glass of champagne with the poise of someone confident the outcome would favor her. She didn't see Martha slip into the crowd, her face tight with something that wasn't exactly fear, but wasn't hope either. Tony didn't touch the keys right away. He sat with his back easy, shoulders low, hands resting on either side of the bench, like a man settling into a long conversation. The ballroom adjusted around him without meaning to. Servers slowed their steps. The buzz near the bar lost a few decibels, and even the ice in glasses seemed to stop clicking. The Steinway's lid threw a soft reflection across his face. You could see the chandelier broken into 100 little suns on the black lacquer. Ethan Park moved closer, but kept a respectful distance, angling himself so the security guard wouldn't drift in front of the keyboard. When Darren edged a step forward out of habit, Ethan gave a small shake of his head and a half-smile that said, "Easy. Let the room breathe." Tony set his fingers on the keys, not pressing, just testing the temperature of the ivory, the way you test bath water with your wrist. The first sound he made wasn't a chord. It was a single note placed like the point of a needle on silk. Another note answered, a neighbor 2 steps away, and then a third, hushed as if asking permission. People who had been holding their phones at chest level raised them a little higher. A few, without quite knowing why, lowered them again. He took Summertime at a walking tempo, about 64 beats a minute, slow enough for the melody to breathe, but not so slow it sagged. The left hand walked a soft, steady bass, 2 and 4, leaning just enough to give the room a pulse. The right hand spoke in spare sentences. No filigree, no fireworks. He used close voicings at first, thirds tucked inside sixths, then let a quartal stack bloom for a heartbeat before folding it back down. A blue note bent at the right place made the chandeliers feel warmer. The pedal came and went in brief touches, enough to let the room taste the resonance before he cleared it with a clean lift. People who had laughed a minute ago found their mouths closed without instruction. One woman set her phone face down on the tablecloth as if she suddenly remembered a library rule. A man in a white dinner jacket dropped his shoulders and forgot to keep them square for the photographers. Near the back, Martha stopped pretending to wipe a spotless counter and just listened, the mints in her pocket a small, cool weight against her hip. Tony didn't push. He wouldn't have called it restraint. For him, it was simply telling the truth. The right hand turned the melody sideways for a bar or two, cradled it in a minor voicing, then returned it home like a friend guided back to the stoop after a walk around the block. In the bridge, he opened the harmony just enough to let a breeze through, left thumb anchoring a low D, while the fingers built a soft span above it, the sort of shape that asks you to lean closer. He let silence sit after the last bar of the phrase, a measured breath where everyone realized together they were waiting. A few heads tilted. Darren's stance softened. Ethan, who had long since given up on gala music doing anything but decorate a room, felt his chest uncurl. Charlotte watched from her table with a glass lifted to her lips and no memory of raising it. She had expected a stumble followed by a polite laugh line. She had prepared for a competent surprise, the kind she could spin into a discovering hidden talent clip. She hadn't prepared for the way the air itself felt different, thicker and kinder, after 3 minutes of a man taking his time. Tony's left hand brought the melody down to ground level again, then let it go with a cadence that didn't clap but nodded. He released the pedal just as the sound would have started to cloud and let the silence be itself. It wasn't the silence of embarrassment or confusion. It was the soft space you leave for a friend when they finish a sentence that matters. No bow, no flourish. He looked nowhere in particular, eyes a little unfocused, like a person listening for a subway train before it arrives. Then he rolled his wrists once, shook his shoulders the smallest amount, and shifted his bench an inch closer. When his hands returned to the keys, the room understood something was about to change languages. The first bar of the classical set landed with a clear-spined confidence, an opening theme articulated so cleanly you could draw its outline in the air. He chose Beethoven, early period, allegro molto, and he didn't do a showman's mashup. He played the argument straight. The left hand's broken chords were machine-precise without sounding mechanical. The right hand's line narrow at first, then suddenly wide, like a window thrown open. Where the score asked for bite, he gave bite. Where it asked for lift, he lifted. The pedal was disciplined, released exactly at the bar line to show the structure like clean bones under skin. The people who had come for spectacle found themselves counting inside their own heads. Now 2, 3, 1, 2, now the cross rhythm, 3 against 2, now it clicks. Ethan leaned forward to catch a fingering choice on the fourth finger that most players smear. Tony didn't smear it. He turned a trill like a held breath and then let it out exactly on time, not 1/16 late. On the climb from piano to forte, his sound got bigger without getting harder, the way a hallway seems larger when you turn on one more lamp. Charlotte set her glass down. Her smile, which had been lacquered on by years of training, loosened at the bottom edge. She looked for PR, then didn't. She had the stray thought that she hated when rooms chose their own story. Tony was not grandstanding. He was building a bridge out of thought. In the development, he broke the theme into small pieces and turned them like stones in his hands, showing the crowd the light trapped inside. He moved through keys, like a person who knows all the streets in a neighborhood and isn't afraid of the occasional dead end because he knows the alley that fixes it. The rhythm section, by which he meant his own left hand, kept the engine low and smooth. When the temptation to rush presented itself, he didn't. Power for him wasn't speed, it was control. He returned to the recapitulation with a tone softer than he'd used at the start, as if he trusted the room to lean in without being asked. The cadence that ended the movement landed like the true last sentence in a conversation where all the others had been questions. Then came another silence, this one shorter, because people understood its grammar now. Applause rose in a clean swell, richer than the earlier laughs, the kind of clapping that belongs to recognition. It wasn't the clatter of crystalline boredom. It was a sound that said, "We see it, we heard it." Ethan, who was careful with words spoken on the record, let a phrase slip at a volume just loud enough to be caught by 3 phones on accident. That's professional standard. He didn't sing it. He signed it, like his name on a document. Tony didn't look over. He simply reset his position on the bench. Most players would have been content to stop there, to harvest a little more applause and retreat before risk entered the picture. Instead, he glanced at Charlotte once. No heat in it, just temperature, and then turned back to the keys and chose difficulty. Not the flashy kind that winks at you and then trips, the hard kind that looks you in the eye. The third piece took off like a precision engine. Octave runs didn't thunder so much as fly. Double-note passages clicked together like a zipper at speed. Left-hand trills, rare and often faked, buzzed steady, while the right hand threaded a melody along the top like a seam. He used wrist rotation to keep repeated notes fast without letting them break, the way a good knitter keeps tension even across a row. The pedal barely kissed the floor on phrase openings and lifted before any fuzz could collect. Crosshand exchanges were tight enough to shave with. When his hands crossed, they didn't tangle. They traded jobs like co-workers who've done this 1,000 times. A man with a cigar stopped halfway to his lips and set it down in the ashtray without taking his eyes off the keyboard. A woman who had studied piano in her teens squinted, not to critique but to savor the voicing choices. Darren found himself leaning forward with the rest of the front row, an unfamiliar pull in his chest, something like pride for a stranger. Tony pushed into a passage where almost everyone loses the thread sooner or later and didn't. He carried the tension to the lip of fortissimo, and then, when a lesser player would have slammed, he didn't. He stepped back to piano in a clean arc, as if stopping a fast car without a jolt, and you could feel the entire room move that same half-step with him. The ending didn't explode. It landed with authority and refused to beg for approval. Silence. 1 beat, 2, and then the room came to its feet. Chairs scraped, glasses chimed, and no one cared about the noise anymore. The standing ovation wasn't orchestrated by PR. It rose like a reflex. You could see people wanting to look at each other to confirm they'd all witnessed the same thing. But most didn't break eye contact with the stage. They just clapped. Martha clapped with one hand while pressing the other against her ribs, like something was too big for just applause. Charlotte stood because the row was standing, and then because there wasn't anywhere else to stand that didn't feel small. She reached for the mic out of habit. The applause didn't make way for her. She waited, and in the tiny wait, she felt the weight of her own words from earlier sliding back toward her like a tide she hadn't researched. Tony rose from the bench only when the room began, on its own, to lower its hands. He didn't bow deep. He didn't play humble or proud. He gave a small nod that said thank you and kept them from putting him anywhere he didn't choose. His gaze found Ethan, and they traded a look you'd miss if you weren't searching for it. It said, "I said what I needed to say." Then Tony looked at Charlotte, just long enough to remind her they shared the same air. He didn't smile. He didn't scowl. It was simply an acknowledgement that words had been spoken under lights, and words have weight. The MC, who had been trained for every scenario except this one, came half onto the stage with a nervous grin. Well, that was something. The line dangled, found no purchase, and fell to the floor. A few laughs tried to be born and weren't. Ethan moved a half step forward, the way a referee steps between two players, not to start an argument, but to formalize the end of a play. "From a professional standpoint," he said evenly, "what you just heard would satisfy any concert stage I've reviewed." He didn't add anything more. He didn't need to. The sentence clicked into the room like a latch. On the left, a cluster of donors who had been giddy for a stunt earlier now looked like people caught telling a joke they no longer found funny. Near the back, a young server whispered, "That was beautiful," as if admitting a secret. Someone else whispered back, "He works here?" Not with disbelief, but with the dawning feeling of having missed a person standing in front of you all along. Charlotte lifted the mic at last, the smile back in place, but thinner, more transparent, as if the room could read through it. "Thank you for that extraordinary performance," she began, and the sound system gave a small feedback squeak like a warning. "Now More!" a voice called from the middle rows, cheerful but not mocking. Another voice answered, "Encore!" And a third, more careful one said, "Let him speak." Tony didn't rush to fill the space. He waited for the energy to stop bouncing. Then he said, not loud, but clear enough, "I'm not here for a circus." His tone wasn't a scold. It was a boundary. "I'm here for folks to keep their word." You could feel the temperature shift again. The idea threaded through the room fast because it was simple. No contracts, no memes, just a promise said out loud in front of witnesses. Phones were still everywhere. Some pointed at the stage. Some now turned to capture Charlotte. Martha felt a flicker of worry for him, and then let it settle. He knew exactly what he was doing, moving the frame from spectacle to dignity and leaving as few handholds as possible for anyone wanting to twist it. "Say something," PR hissed at Charlotte from the aisle, not unkindly, just doing her job. Charlotte exhaled through her nose, a breath that carried a decade of training about how to steer a room. She opened her mouth to do it and closed it again. For once, steering wasn't right. "Ms. Avery," Ethan said, taking his own step back, not to crowd the moment. As a matter of record, he just met a professional standard. The phrase repeated itself in half a dozen videos at the same time, on the balcony, on the aisle, in the far left corner, like a stamp. Tony didn't look triumphant. If anything, he looked lighter, as if some tight band inside him had loosened. He rested one hand on the top of the piano, fingers spread, palm warm against the wood. For a second, he wasn't in a hotel ballroom, but in a practice room the size of a closet, 20 years and a lifetime ago, when a long afternoon could be measured in scales and pages instead of shifts and rules about which elevator you were allowed to use. Martha thought of the laminated "No Staff in Photo Areas" sign and felt, for the first time, how cheap it looked. At the bar, a man who had teased about black and white keys stared at the floor. It wasn't shame that pinned his eyes there. It was the sudden clarity of having heard something that made his sentence sound small. Darren straightened, then caught himself and softened again. He wanted to apologize, and he didn't know how to do it without making the moment about him. He settled for learning the man's name with his whole attention. Tony's hand left the piano top. He took in the faces in front of him, the ones that had laughed, the ones that had waited, the ones that had watched him the way you watch a window cleaner, grateful and a little blind. His voice, when it came, was almost conversational. "Thank you for listening." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was steady and warm, like a good rain that does what it's supposed to and then stops. A woman near the aisle dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin and turned to the friend beside her. The friend was already looking at the stage the way you look at a person stepping off a bus who hasn't been home in a long time. At the edge of the room, by the column wrapped in white flowers, an older voice rose, soft, certain, the kind of voice that still carried because it wasn't pushing. "I know him." The woman who said it didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room had learned how to listen. Gray hair pinned neatly at the nape, bifocals catching a rim of chandelier light, she stepped one pace out from her row and steadied herself on the back of a chair. "I know him," she repeated, more to the air than to any one person. "Anthony Carter." The name moved like a key turning. A small, clean sound in a quiet house. Heads tilted, the first layer of noise peeled back, and the space between stage and seats seemed to shorten by a foot. Tony felt the syllables cross the room and land on him. Anthony. He hadn't heard it said like that. Full, careful, respectful, in a long while. He didn't flinch. He gave the woman time. She adjusted her glasses. He played at the City Theater when he was 22. I remember because the encore ran past 10, and my husband, God rest him, missed the last train. We walked home and neither of us minded. She smiled at the memory, then squared her shoulders, the way former schoolteachers do without thinking. They wrote about it. A touch both exacting and tender. That was the phrase. Ethan looked slightly upward, as if sifting a card catalog in his head. Exacting and tender. He'd read that, or something close to it, in a review in a paper that didn't do praise lightly. He nodded once, not to the woman exactly, but to the record now being pulled from the shelf and set in the center of the room. A murmur moved through the rows, not the restless kind, but the hum of people recalculating a story they thought they knew. A man near the aisle whispered, "So he wasn't just..." and didn't finish the sentence because suddenly the end of it tasted wrong. A server in black and white looked at Tony like seeing a co-worker arrive for a shift and realizing he'd been somewhere else entirely before this job. Charlotte felt her heartbeat misplace 2 steps. City Theater, review. The words floated past the careful scaffolding she erected around every event and clicked into joints she couldn't reach with PR tape. She found herself glancing, of all useless directions, toward the laminated sign taped in the side hall. No staff in photo areas. It looked smaller in her mind now, shabby even. The way a bandage looks after the wound is already healed underneath, and you wonder why you're still wearing it. Ethan took half a step forward, a gesture he had learned in years of panel discussions. Move only when it adds something. "I remember a conservatory note," he said, voice even. Faculty called him a musician with a wide ear and rare pedal control for his age. He didn't use a paper's name. He didn't need to. The specificity did the work. Several heads turned toward him the way you look at a notary when the seal goes down. Martha had stood still through the applause earlier, the way people stand when the emotion is too big to walk around with. Now she moved to the edge of the aisle and spoke without apology. "If you're going to say his name," she said, "then tell the truth that goes with it." The room gave her quiet. She took it. "Anthony left school when his mother got sick," Martha said, plain as a ledger. "Her hospital bills came in like a weather front. He sold his first piano to pay down what insurance didn't cover, packed up sheet music in a cardboard box, and took the night shift because day shifts don't always pay rent." She didn't dress it up. She didn't ask for pity with her eyes. She put the words on the table like a set of keys. The older woman who'd recognized Tony pressed a hand to her chest, not dramatically, just as if settling a flutter. A younger guest glanced at the stage, then at Martha, then at the ceiling, somewhere safe to set his gaze while his mind rearranged its furniture. Darren felt something pinch behind his sternum. He remembered Tony's quiet "Evening, sir," at the service door in the weeks since he'd joined the Astoria. He remembered answering without using a name because names aren't required in the manual. He saw himself in an unflattering mirror and held the look instead of turning away. Charlotte heard the words and felt them land not as accusations, but as inventory. Not a prosecutor's list. A steward's. She could see the path from a sold piano to a laminated sign with bossy font. The line wasn't straight, but it connected. Tony kept his hands easy at his sides. He didn't move to the mic. He let Martha lay the rails and the witnesses ride them with their own eyes open. When she looked his way, asking without words if she'd gone too far, he gave a small nod. Keep going. Folks like to say procedure when they mean invisible. Martha continued softer, as if explaining something to a friend in a kitchen. I've watched good people do it with good manners and never hear it in their own voice. She glanced, just once, at the side hall where the service elevator waited behind its heavy door. Tonight, he put music in the room that made quiet feel honest, not empty. Ethan breathed out through his nose, slow. He'd written that line in other words once, quiet that isn't absence, but presence, and felt a private satisfaction at hearing it reappear in a different mouth. He turned slightly and caught Charlotte's profile. The practiced angle of her chin was back, but beneath it, the smallest muscles, jaw hinge, the set just below the ear, told the truth of effort. One of the donors who had been lively earlier raised his hand half an inch as if in a boardroom. He dropped it without speaking. Not the time. A woman in a green shawl said, to no one in particular, "We ask people to enter through loading docks and then pretend we didn't ask." Her friend answered, equally to the air, "We say buddy because we don't want to learn the name and pretend the tone is friendly." The pianist on stage who had played during the cocktail hour, a competent young man with the clean haircut of weddings, stood with his arms folded and a rueful smile. He knew when he'd been surpassed. He also knew what good it did a room to be asked to listen beyond background. Tony finally took 2 steps forward, not to take the mic, but to close the distance by a human margin. "I didn't leave music because I stopped loving it," he said. His voice had the calm of someone rehearsed not in performance, but in telling hard truths without punishing anyone for hearing them. "I left because every time I sat at a piano, the sound sent me to a hospital room. That kind of memory you can't rush past. So I worked nights until I could stand in a room with a piano and feel something else again." He let the last clause rest. "Tonight I did." It wasn't a speech. It was a verification. People nodded the way you do when a mechanic points to the part and says, "That's where the noise is." Ethan's eyes softened. He saw the story arc in real time, the detour, the return, and resisted the critic's old bad habit of writing the neat headline in his head. The better ending was always work, not words. Charlotte lifted the mic because she knew the room was waiting for her to lift the mic. She had 2 versions of a sentence competing for her throat. The polished one, "We celebrate hidden talent and the rich fabric of our team." The true one, "I was wrong." For a heartbeat, she felt the fear of the second and the thinness of the first. The fear didn't go away when she chose the second, but it moved aside. "I was wrong," she said, not loud but with a spine. "I didn't call him by his name. I turned a person into a prop." The room didn't applaud. It held still, which was better. PR from the aisle looked at her like a tightrope walker who'd stepped out without a net and was, unexpectedly, finding her balance. Before Charlotte could go on, a reporter at the back raised a phone, and the little red record light blinked like a stern ant tapping a watch. The red light was a blessing and a threat. It made the next sentences heavier and cleaner. Martha's eyes shone, but not with tears, with a sort of yes. She stepped half a pace closer to the center aisle and found an angle where she could see both Tony and Charlotte without turning her head. Her hands were still. You could almost hear the 90-second break she takes between floors at 3 a.m., kneading a sore knee and making a joke about getting older because jokes weigh less than pain. The older woman who had said Anthony Carter lifted her chin as if to pass the baton properly. "Thank you for saying his name," she told Charlotte. The simple courtesy landed truer than a bouquet. A rustle moved across the back rows. Phones buzzing, screens lighting. Social media had found the event. Headlines boiled up fast as popcorn. Heiress mocks janitor. Janitor stuns room. Clips looped the line about marriage against the slow bloom of summertime, then cut hard to Charlotte holding a mic. If the internet could vote by volume, it already had. Ethan, who understood amplification better than most musicians ever would, spoke without looking at a camera. "This is not a clip," he said to the room. "This is a record." He wasn't scolding the phones. He was reminding the humans. A few people lowered their devices by an inch. Darren, who hadn't moved from his post since the first set of music, felt eyes on him. Not accusing, just aware, and startled at the small relief that came with it. Being seen turned out not to be a punishment. It was oxygen. He rolled his shoulders once and let them settle lower. A young staffer near the door whispered, "He used to be at the conservatory," and her co-worker whispered back, "My cousin tried twice to get in and never did." You could hear, if you were listening, the sound of a hierarchy losing a tooth and discovering the bite was better. The MC hovered in a no-man's land between program and moment, then did the wisest thing he'd done all night and stepped back 2 paces. Charlotte faced the room and let her shoulders drop a fraction. "Anthony," she said deliberately, "I can't undo what I said. And I won't pretend the word marry means something it doesn't. But I can keep my word the right way." It wasn't yet a list of action items. It was a promise to make a real promise, only a notch better than nothing, but all the difference if you meant it. Tony didn't nod. He wasn't a judge handing out grades. He placed a hand on the piano lid, fingers spread like a carpenter measuring without a ruler. Beside him, the Steinway sat with the polite patience of a large animal who knows it has already done its job for the evening and will not be asked for more. Ethan's attention flicked to the balcony, where 2 young reporters were whispering into their phones. He wondered which line they'd choose to carry into the city by midnight. The dare, the playing, or the sentence about keeping a word. He hoped for the last and expected the first. He made a note to do his part in the morning. Martha angled her body toward Charlotte, not aggressive, not meek. She had spent her life learning the exact stance that gets a thing heard in rooms designed to talk over her. "Ms. Avery," she said, gentler than you'd expect from someone whose job was to point out what was wrong with a mirror finish. "We don't need flowers. We need doors that don't stick." Charlotte felt a smile twitch. Not the PR one, the human one that comes when a metaphor lands right on the money. Doors that don't stick. She thought of the staff elevator, the way it juddered on floor 2 and made newcomers think it would break even though it never did. She thought of the words "staff, stay out of frame" and heard them now in a different key. Procedures she could recite in her sleep started to sound like stories she didn't want told about her. Phones buzzed again. A producer she knew texted 3 words. "On our way." Cameras would be here in minutes. Statements would be needed. Her old training quickened in her fingers, but something older and better held her in place. The older woman, Anthony's unexpected historian, took her seat, satisfied that the ledger had been opened in the right column. The green-shawled woman dabbed her eyes. The man with the cigar kept his hand off it. People shifted, not to leave, but to give one another a little more room, an odd courtesy to find inside a ballroom built for close quarters. Tony turned his head and found Martha. The look they traded had years in it. Lost sleep, long hallways, running jokes about stubborn stains, the shared knowledge of who takes out the trash when everyone else is done performing. It also had tonight in it, bright and not yet filed. Ethan checked the time, surprised to find it had advanced without the boredom he associated with charity evenings. He wanted to write, and he wanted to wait. The better sentence would be born of actions yet to be announced. He adjusted his tie like a man resetting a metronome. Charlotte felt the question arrive. What now? Not in the PR sense, but in the adult sense. She glanced at the PR chief, who gave a tiny nod, meaning, if you're going to do it clean. She looked back at the room and took a breath big enough to carry her past the old habit of hedging. Before she spoke, Martha's voice came again, not as witness this time, but as compass. He doesn't need pity, she said, each word polished by use. She turned, at last, to look Charlotte full in the face, no tremor in her tone, no starch either. He needs the doors to stay open. The ballroom didn't empty quickly. People lingered in clusters, speaking in the low, reflective tones of guests who sense the program is over but aren't ready to break the spell. The champagne had gone flat in some glasses. Others had been set down half full and forgotten. Charlotte Avery stood at the edge of the stage, the mic still in her hand, feeling its weight differently now. She'd been holding microphones for most of her adult life. Fundraisers, press conferences, shareholder updates. Tonight, it didn't feel like a tool. It felt like a test. She caught PR's eyes in the crowd. The look she got back was a silent question. Are you going to walk it back or walk it forward? Charlotte already knew the answer. She'd spent years perfecting the art of buying time. Now it felt like the costliest thing she could do. She stepped to the center and spoke without the performer's rise and fall cadence. I gave my word, she said. I'm keeping it. The hush in the room deepened, not from suspense but from focus. She let the words sit, then went on. I can't erase what I said earlier, and I can't erase the fact that I said it in front of 100 people and cameras, but I can choose what follows it. So here is what follows. First, the Carter Scholarship, a fund to sponsor music education for students in this city who can play with the skill we heard tonight, but can't afford the path to a stage. Second, a concert series hosted right here at the Astoria Grand, featuring artists from Harlem, from Brooklyn, from anywhere in New York where talent lives without an invitation. Third, anti-bias training for every level of staff, including myself. Not just a yearly video, but in-person sessions with real dialogue. And fourth, pay and policy reforms for everyone who works here. That means benefits, that means wage reviews, and that means we start with the staff who've been here the longest. She paused, letting the list breathe. The PR team had already started typing furiously into their phones, shaping a press release before she was even finished. This isn't a stunt, she said, and this time she looked up from the mic and scanned the faces. If you think it is, watch us. Watch me. We'll post the scholarship application dates by the end of next week. The concert series schedule will be on that same board in the lobby. And the policy changes will be printed, signed, and posted in the staff break room, because the people who need to see them most aren't on Instagram. She stepped back, lowering the mic. For once, there was no rush to fill the silence. A few people clapped cautiously, then more joined. Not the giddy kind of applause from earlier in the evening, but the steady, grounded kind that meant, we heard you. We'll see. In the weeks that followed, the promises began to take form. The lobby's gilt-framed bulletin board, usually reserved for event flyers, now carried a bold header, Keys for Dignity, Initiative Timeline. Underneath were 4 columns, scholarships, concert series, staff training, policy updates. Each column had dates, bullet points, and a last updated stamp in neat black ink. Tony walked past it on his way in for a night shift. He slowed, not to read every word, but to take in the fact that it was there, out in the open where guests and staff shared the same sightline. In the ballroom, a poster hung from the back wall. Keys for Dignity in elegant serif type, framed by an image of a piano lid opening into light. Below it, a photograph of the Steinway taken from above, Tony's hands mid-phrase. The credit line didn't read Janitor or staff. It read, Anthony Carter, pianist. The first Carter Scholarship was awarded to a high school senior from the Bronx named Marisol Vega. She played trumpet, not piano, but her audition video carried the same kind of truth Tony had brought to the ballroom: unrushed, exact, and not asking for permission to exist. Marisol met Tony in the lobby on the day of her scholarship announcement. "They told me you don't like big speeches," she said. "So I'll just say thanks." "Thanks works," Tony said, shaking her hand. The concert series opened with a trio from Harlem: bass, drums, and a pianist who grinned like he was in on a secret the whole time. Tony sat in the back row with Martha and Darren. When the bass player took a solo that slid under your ribs and stayed there, Tony leaned forward and tapped the beat on his knee. Charlotte moved quietly through the crowd that night, not to be seen, but to see. She stopped to talk with the cleaning crew between sets, asking about their shifts, their families, the stubborn elevator on floor 2. Staff training took longer to launch, but when it did, the sessions didn't feel like checkboxes. They were held in the ballroom itself, chairs in a circle, name tags on everyone whether they wore suits or aprons. The trainer, a wiry man with laugh lines and a voice like gravel, started each meeting the same way. "Say your name, say what you do, and say how you'd like to be treated while you're doing it." By the third session, people started answering that last part without irony. Policy changes rolled out quietly but steadily. Pay raises showed up in paychecks. Break times were enforced instead of eaten by urgent tasks. The sign reading "No staff in photo areas" came down, leaving 4 small holes in the wall. No one rushed to patch them. The empty screw anchors stood like punctuation marks in a sentence the hotel was still writing. One evening, long after the last guest had left and the lights in the ballroom had been dimmed, Tony sat at the Steinway again. No cameras, no crowd, just the soft hum of the air system and the faint city noise through the windows. He played something new, weaving fragments of summertime into an original melody. When he finished, Darren stepped out from the shadow by the door. "I didn't want to interrupt," he said. "Name's Darren, by the way. Don't think I ever introduced myself proper." Tony smiled. Better late than never. By the time the summer gala came around the following year, the ballroom felt different. The posters were still there, the scholarship board updated, the concert flyers stacked neatly in the lobby. Guests passed the staff in the halls and sometimes stopped to greet them by name. Charlotte stood near the back during the opening set, her phone face down on the table. Martha sat beside her, arms folded, the ghost of a smile at the corners of her mouth. In the east hallway, the wall where the old sign had hung was still bare. 4 holes, unfilled, a reminder and a promise side by side. The gala's final night was always a swirl of gowns, black ties, and last-minute toasts. But this year, there was a different current running through the Astoria Grand. A current that didn't start from the champagne bar or the photo wall. It started in the lobby, at the tall bulletin board under the gold molding. The Carter Scholarship winners' portraits were pinned there like an honor roll. Marisol Vega's smile caught the light from the revolving doors. Below her, 2 new faces, a violinist from Queens named Raphael Cruz and a gospel singer from Newark, Naomi Tate. Guests paused to read their short bios before even checking their coats. In the ballroom, the Steinway stood a little closer to the center than it had in years past, no longer treated as background furniture. A vase of white lilies sat on top, just enough fragrance to cut through the smell of catering without competing with it. Tony was already in the building hours before the first guests arrived. He had helped Darren set up the extra chairs for the performers' families. He'd walked Martha through the catering team's setup schedule, not because it was his job, but because that was the rhythm of his nights here, making sure the moving parts didn't grind against each other. "You ready for this?" Martha asked, leaning on the edge of the stage while Tony adjusted the bench. "I'm ready for them to listen," he said. Charlotte arrived without the usual fanfare. No extra photographers, no rehearsed greeting lines. She walked the floor in low heels, stopping to talk to staff before she took her place at the front table. It was her 3rd gala since the night everything changed, and she'd learned how to inhabit the room without commanding it. Ethan Park was back too, sitting with a small notebook in his lap. He wasn't here on assignment this time. He was here because he wanted to see what second chapters look like in real life. The evening's program began with the scholarship winners. Raphael played a piece that turned the chatter into a hush in 30 seconds flat. Naomi followed with a gospel hymn so rich that even the most self-conscious guests found themselves swaying in their seats. Then Charlotte stood, and instead of a speech, simply said, "Anthony Carter." The applause rose before Tony even reached the piano. He walked with the same unhurried step as before, but there was no trace of being pushed into the spotlight this time. He sat, adjusted the bench, and placed both hands on the keys. He began with something new, a piece that wasn't jazz, wasn't classical, but carried pieces of both like the scent of two kitchens mingling in the same apartment building. The melody wound through the room like a street you'd walked before, but couldn't name until you reached the corner. His touch was light in some phrases, decisive in others. The left hand kept time with the patience of a man who knows the beat will come back around, no need to chase it. The right hand played with space, letting certain notes hang just long enough for the room to lean in. Ethan's pen didn't move. Some music you write about later, not during. In the middle of the piece, Tony shifted seamlessly into Summertime. It wasn't the defiant version from that first night. This one was looser, almost conversational. The crowd heard it not as a dare, but as an invitation. A few people closed their eyes. Darren, standing at the back, let his posture relax without realizing it. When the final note faded, the applause was steady and warm. No cameras in his face this time, no undercurrent of surprise, just appreciation. During the reception that followed, Tony found himself beside Charlotte at the edge of the dance floor. "You kept your word," he said simply. She met his eyes. "I told you to watch me." "I did," he said. "Others did too." There was no bitterness in it, just a statement of fact. Later that night, as the last guests left and the staff began breaking down the tables, Martha handed Tony a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" he asked. "Letter from Naomi," she said. "She didn't want to make a fuss." He opened it. The handwriting was round and a little uneven. "Mr. Carter, I want you to know that playing tonight felt like opening a window in a room I didn't know was locked. Thank you for making space for us. I hope I can do the same for someone else one day." He folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. Outside, the city was its usual mix of sirens and laughter, steam rising from grates. Darren held the service door open for Tony, just like any other night, but added, "See you next year, Mr. Carter." Tony smiled. "Yeah, next year." Back in the empty ballroom, the Steinway sat in the spill of the stage light, lid half open like it was listening. The 4 holes in the wall where the old sign had been were still there, unfilled, unhidden. They didn't need patching anymore. They told the story better than paint ever could. Tony sat at the piano one last time that night. No audience, no program. Just him, the keys, and a city outside that would never run out of second chances for those who knew how to listen for them. He played until the sky began to lighten. Some nights stay with you long after the chairs are stacked and the lights go dim. This was one of them. In a quiet ballroom that had once been just another glittering room in the city, a man sat at a piano and turned a dare into dignity. I've seen a lot in 60-plus years. Marches that shook the streets, small kindnesses no camera ever caught. But it's rare to witness the moment a room changes its heart. That night, it wasn't the polished speeches or the gold trim that people carried home. It was the sound of truth, finding its own voice. I keep thinking about how still everyone became when Anthony Carter played, how the applause, when it came, wasn't about surprise anymore, but respect. In that hush, I remembered neighbors from my youth in the black community who carried themselves with that same quiet strength. Folks who knew what it meant to be unseen, yet refused to let anyone write their worth for them. They didn't need to shout to make a point. They lived it, steady and unshaken, until even those who'd looked past them had to look again. The lesson to me is simple, but it's not easy. Hold on to your dignity and stand up for the truth of who you are with a calm, human grace. That's how you not only reclaim justice, but build something better out of the harm. I've learned it's the same whether you're at a Steinway or standing in a grocery line. Keep your word, keep your head, and let your actions play the loudest note. Like a lantern in a kitchen window on a stormy night, one steady light can guide us through the darkest streets. And the Black community, time and again, has shown the world how to keep that light burning in the face of every kind of wind. I'd tell you, too, that what happened in that ballroom doesn't just belong to Anthony or to the guests who were there. It belongs to anyone who's been underestimated. It belongs to the Black community elder who mentors a teenager after school. It belongs to the quiet worker who holds the place together when nobody's looking. It belongs to anyone who's had their name misused or their skill overlooked and still chose to let their best speak for itself. So, maybe take a minute tonight, after the dishes are done and the house is still, to think about the people you pass every day. The man sweeping the sidewalk, the woman ringing up your groceries, the kid playing saxophone on the corner. There's a whole symphony of lives out there, and you never know which one might change the way you hear the world. If this story found its way into your heart, consider passing that warmth along to someone who could use it. It doesn't have to be grand, just a word, a hand, a little space for someone to be seen. You never know what music might follow.